What is up, my peeps? Joshua Smith here at GSD Studios. Thank you so much for checking out today's show. I'll make this extremely fast, but I need to plug our sponsor that's making today's show possible. Our sponsor today is OptimizedLifeNutrition.com with their supplement EMF. EMF stands for Energy, Memory, Focus. This is the most powerful nootropic on the marketplace. If you are like me and you're serious about having maximum amounts of energy, extreme laser focus, if you want to go out there and eliminate your brain fog, be at your best, and as well as there's proven ingredients to increase your long-term memory, then this product's for you. Check out more information, see client testimonials at www.optimizedlifenutrition.com. All right, you guys, let's dive on into today's content. What is up, our peeps? Joshua Smith at GSD Studios with Jay Campbell and Jim Brown for another weekly Ask Jim and Jay episode. So really stoked to have all of you guys watching and listening right now. So today we're going to talk about a really popular documentary. I think from what Jay was saying earlier, it's like the most currently downloaded or watched documentary on Netflix, and it's called What the Health. And we wanted to hit on some things in there because there's some things that, we totally congruent with what we preach with optimal health and living the most optimized life you possibly can. And there could potentially be some, things that, we don't align with either that are in there. So we wanted to hit on that. So real quick, Jay, I know that you've seen it. I got to watch it tonight. I'm guilty of not watching it yet. Right. But I know they talk very heavily about veganism and other things in there. So like, what are some things in there that you saw that you think they were spot on with that you totally agree with?
Well, definitely, the massive intake of processed food in North America and really just globally, from a GMO engineered standpoint, that's what the primary food stuff today in the world is processed food, boxed food stuff we find on grocery stores. And, their argument in the movie or the debate they try to make is that it's also, the eating of animal fat and animal protein that's leading to the massive rise in obesity and the disease states that we always obviously talk about when we talk about optimization. So there's, you can't really make an argument other than the people they have on the show try to say that they do. But I mean, at the end of the day, eating like shit, overeating or over-consuming carbohydrates, massive increases of insulin are obviously leading to diabetes. They are ultimately leading to obesity. They are also leading to more, the diseases of aging and obviously early death. As we know, 73% of the American public right now is classified as obese. So it's a good movie in my opinion from a standpoint of like what they're trying to portray. I don't agree with their statement that it's animal fat that's causing the issues from a diabetes standpoint and causing most of the disease of aging. It's more of a combination effect of eating high trans fats and sugar together. Do you want to add something to that, Jim?
Yeah, I know my video's not up, but can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so the whole thing in that movie is, well, there's a couple things, but the one thing that I totally agree with that they talk about the animal fat or the animal protein and consumption of meat is, as we've talked about, anytime that you consume an animal, especially a large animal, it has this bioaccumulation to it. So if you think about how many pounds of hay a cow eats in its life, and all the toxins that it accumulates from the environment, from being a large animal, from pesticides, antibiotics, whatever, then you think of the ways that the animal can get rid of those toxins, through respiration, sweat, urination. The massive or the most amount of toxins are going to be dumped in its fat, and if it's a milking cow, most of the toxins that animal accumulates over its life, that's going to be its largest way to expel all those toxins. And so when you do eat a dairy product, especially like a milk or a cheese, it's literally an accumulation of all the toxins that were in that animal. And so, as we've always talked about, when you eat a dairy product or a product that has animal fat in it, if you're going to do that, it should be an organic choice. Does that make it free of those toxins? No, but it's a better choice than non-organic. So I did agree with that portion of the movie. from their standpoint. But then, where they kind of lost me was, eating eggs will raise your cholesterol and be dangerous and all those things. But from that standpoint, I agree with what they said for sure. And then, of course, we'll talk about the bad fats and the trans fats and accumulation of omega-6s.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. Well said, Jim. Josh, they're trying to make, the veganism movement is really, I think, the staunch financial arm or contribution of this documentary. And the vegans, the hardcore vegans are crazy, man. They're like, they're as more devout and more fundamentalist as any like hardcore, Bible thumping Christian. And I won't, judge people like that, but we all know how ardent and, crazy they can be in their beliefs. And a lot of these people that are vegans are the same way. And so they're like super hardcore. But they did interview, and I put a link from like one of those bariatric surgeons, Jim, on Twitter, and it got retweeted like 100 times last week. But it's his comment was that it's not insulin that's causing diabetes; it's animal fat, and it's an overconsumption of fat. And then they try to make a correlation does not equal causation, but they're trying to correlate that in Japan, the diet is 70% carbohydrate, but yet no one has diabetes over there, which is obviously a poor comparison because of the way the Japanese are, and especially their body types and whatnot. And they're not even mentioning insulin sensitivity. But the reality is that we have, documented clinical proof that, the failure or the rise of insulin, high glycation or N-glycation sugar products from high blood glucose is what leads to diabetes and what leads to insulin chemoreceptors failing. So, to say otherwise is kind of nonsensical. Did you see that part though, Jim?
Yeah, I did. But you do have to take in consideration that, well, there's a couple of things there. One is, we don't have the science that says somebody ate low fat, but they ate all the sugar they wanted.
Right.
Group of people to compare that to. And so It's hard to do that. We know for a fact that the eating of animal meat that has carcinogens in it, if you grill or if you smoke meat, it has more carcinogens in it than if you bake it. If you're eating a fatty piece of meat that has, the accumulations of toxins from that animal's life. And if worse yet, you're eating a processed meat like a lunch meat or a sausage, yeah, man, that's not good for you. That in combination with a high insulin release, yeah, it's a vascular inflammation nightmare. And I think that their point there that they were trying to make was when you eat these animal proteins and it's all those combinations of things, you get this inflammatory response that doesn't allow insulin to be processed properly, and that's absolutely correct.
Right.
The other thing that they really pounded home on that was the study that came out a while ago that said, if you eat lunch meat, you have like I'm going to be wrong with my number here, 25 or 36% chance of getting cancer. Yeah. It's not from the meat. It's from the chemicals that are in that processed meat.
Right.
And, they did do a good job of that, extrapolating the information with that, and then going to all those societies, the Diabetic Society, Susan G. Komen and all those. And they recommend eating those types of foods when they're classified as a class 1 carcinogen.
Right.
That's the same as tobacco. And that's ridiculous. And if you think about it, that's, you and I, we all know that's what most people eat. Most people don't eat lean protein and cuts of steak, cuts of chicken breast. They eat processed meat. And so, yeah, that's a huge, they did a good job in pointing out that. Of course, they came from their viewpoint and skewed information a little bit, but there's a lot of good information in there.
Yeah.
Why do you think? I mean, I know you said that they talked heavily about Japanese eating, like let's just say a high-base carbohydrate diet because of a lot of the rice consumption, whatever it is that they do that, and they're not finding a correlation there. Or you said that they're not seeing the high levels of diabetics. I mean, do you think that that's more because they're just not eating an insanely high amount? They're eating small portions of the carbohydrates and then get away with it, or are they just that much more active, or like why is that there, even though their diet is so much carbohydrate based?
You want to get that, Jim? Go ahead.
Yeah, if I'm going to extrapolate on that a little bit, or I'm going to I'm going to guess at that. I haven't read that study, but if I think about a traditional Japanese diet, I'm not thinking about people who are consuming a high amount of processed or a high amount of processed meats or a high amount of dairy or cheese type products or fatty beef. I'm thinking usually fish, rice, and vegetables.
Right.
And so that goes back to the point I made about, we don't really have a population that was fed carbohydrates, even if it was like high fructose corn syrup with low fat. But we do have a population of people like that, and like Okinawans and people who have eaten literally, lower fat and intelligent carbohydrates. Yeah, it's a higher amount of carbohydrates and they're active. There's a huge rural population to that society. So they're not, sitting behind a desk all day. So I think there's a couple things in that, but they don't eat the amount of processed animal products that we do.
Exactly. And
so you can eat more carbohydrates, and especially if they're good carbs.
Well, you also have to add to it. So Jim's right. So that, essentially, and by the way, I've spent 6 months in Japan when I was in college. I'm very familiar with Japanese culture. Actually been in almost every major city. I've ridden the bullet train backwards and forwards across the country. I've climbed parts of Mount Fuji. The Japanese actually eat a very, very, very stringent macrobiotic diet. Okay, so Jim's totally right. Hey, Jim has just appeared like magic on our show. But realistically, Josh, they also eat way less. Okay, and this is what I was trying to say on Twitter. The Japanese people, by and large, are tiny. Like Japanese men, for the most part, like the average guy is 5'6" or 5'7". And they're tiny people. They're small bone. They're narrow, wispy shapes. They're just really short, small, tiny people. So they do not consume the amount of foods that like the typical Western diet. I mean, I would honestly say this, and I'm just going, spewing this out, but I would say that the average American eats twice the amount of calories in a day that the average Japanese does. So when you start talking and extrapolating, like James talks about processed food and boxed foodstuffs and GMO and shit and instantaneous crap that people in the Western cultures and Western worlds eat compared to Japanese. I mean, Japanese literally have like what are called boxed lunches. They're Shinbu boxed lunches, and they're just like literally tiny rice wraps with a tiny little bit of tuna and then some vegetables or some like, what do you call it? I forget what they call it, like celery or whatever. I forgot that little piece, but that's what they eat. They're nibblers, man. They don't eat a lot of food. Their caloric consumption is way less than what we have.
Yeah, and I think you kind of hit on this a minute ago, Jay. But Russ Scala says their microbiome is different.
Yep, absolutely true.
Because of assuming lifestyle. Luke asked, which kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier, Jim, with the way that we prepare meats. But Luke asks, what's the best method for cooking meat to get rid of those impurities?
Well, the best, you have to pick your meat intelligently. Yeah. And so that would be ideally that would be like game meat. If I could afford, or if I had the means to, just solely like Rogan does to go hunt a few times throughout the year and stock my freezer with game meat, that would be 90% of what I ate. Short of that, I would say a grass-fed beef, a chicken from a farmer that doesn't pump sodium into it to preserve it. And then I've never been a fatty meat guy either. So when I order or when I buy grass-fed beef, it's usually a lean cut, so there's not a lot of fat on it to begin with. When I eat chicken, I pull all the fat off. You could grill it, but if you grill it, you have to grill it at a low temperature, and you're not supposed to let it be flame broiled. When you flame broil it, that puts carcinogens on it. If you smoke it, that adds to the amount of carcinogens from the smoke. So ideally, it would be baking on a rack where the fat could escape. But it's more, preparation is eating a leaner meat, a leaner cut, and making sure that food or the meat hasn't been processed by the time it gets to you. They talked about in that show, they were showing, how they process chicken, and they were pumping it full of sodium. And so if you go to the freezer section at Costco and you buy a chicken breast, you'll see that the ingredients are chicken and salt, salt solution at X%. Now, I don't know if they do that to every cut of chicken that comes through. Like if you go buy a pack of chicken breast, If that's the case, I don't know for sure 100%, but the safest way to do that is buy from a local farmer, and where you don't know that that's happening, where you know that that's not happening. Yeah. But their big thing, they touched on the pork industry, and man, it was not only what it does to the environment, but the treatment of the animals and all that stuff. What they feed the animals is awful. And then, those are usually in places where they're growing a huge amount of agriculture too, and they're fed GMO grains. And when you eat a piece of pork, there's a huge amount of fat on it. There's not any really lean cuts of pork that people eat. And so that's probably the highest, offender. And then you eat something like a bratwurst that has pork in it, all that fat, and then all the processing chemicals and nitrates. I mean, that's a freaking inflammation nightmare. So
yeah.
It's kind of like the universe played a cruel trick on us. Everything that is shitty for us. Like if it's nasty, dry, then it's just how it goes, man. And when you break it down, like I know it's costly because like we get as much meat as we possibly can from local farmers. We'll buy like grass-fed organic buffalo, and like we did the math the other day, like just this one little meatloaf, that we got from them was like, I don't know, like $40. But it's expensive. But then when you compare that to going out to eat, it's still way cheaper. You know, so when you do the math, I mean, it just cut out eating out so much, cook a little bit more at home, and it more than makes up for that difference of buying the good quality food.
You can't, if you look back on your life and you're a 45-year-old guy or a 40-year-old guy, even worse, with a chest on your scar from open heart surgery, and they say that the vessels are going to stay open maybe 8 to, if you're lucky, 18 years. Was it worth skimping out and buying the cheap beef? Man, I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. So I know, Jay, you were saying too, the documentary talked a lot about the links with, food and depression. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
So the movie has a little bit about just where we are as a modernized society, and how the food, big agri, as Aaron always likes to say, has kind of engineered a culture that is depressed, that is, for the most part, unbalanced, as we always would say in our optimized sphere of influence, where they have high estrogen, low testosterone. If they're a woman, maybe low progesterone or estrogen, and low testosterone themselves. And so everybody is just constantly, here to there because they're so unbalanced. And so what do, right? They go to their doctor. And what does the doctor do? Well, the average doctor doesn't check their hormones. He prescribes them a little blue pill, which is an SSRI inhibitor, which could be anything. It could be Wellbutrin, it could be Paxil, it could be Restoril, it could be Prozac. I mean, there's so many of these drugs. And then you've got people that are now, that's what the SSRI stands for, obviously, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. They're messing with their brains, their synaptic pathways, their neurotransmitters, and they become hooked on the meds. They literally need the med to feel better, to have increased dopamine, to have increased serotonin. It's crazy. And essentially, their argument in the movie, and then the article that I was talking about specifically that just came out a couple of days ago. I can't remember where it was, but it's on all the major news indexes. Is that majority of people in America right now, when they are asked, are classified as depressed. Like 73% are obese. I think it's like 68% of people in America now, when asked, "Do you suffer from a mild form of depression?" say yes. So we are now looking at a society that is fat, which doesn't help psychological health, obviously, anyway, right? When you look in the mirror and look what you see. And then on top of that, you've got this, they're depressed. The majority of them are depressed. So we're dealing with a society that is clearly being engineered to be fat, depressed, and likely sick through diseases of aging that ultimately happen when you're not, capable of going out. Because let's face it, guys, when you're depressed, I mean, obviously, being obese, you're limited in your mobility. But when you're depressed, it is like a double whammy, because then now you don't want to do anything. You're not going to even attempt to try to lose weight. You feel terrible about yourself. You don't want to go out in public, most likely. You have a negative self-image. So it's just like a double whammy. So, they were talking about that too. But, that's kind of where we are in America today, where people are fucking, a mess. We got
one of the doctors that they interviewed, had said this a couple times, and it's something that we've talked about many times. Russ talks about it a lot. In the business model of medicine, there's no place for a well person.
Right.
Nobody makes money on a well person.
Right.
Right. And so if you put the tinfoil hat on, which isn't so tinfoil nowadays,
no, it's not.
And think about all the ways, we're kind of in this big click funnel right now, right? Nobody wants a well person. And so, if you feed us crap, if you give us antidepressants, if you treat, everything's set up for you to be sicker and sicker once you get in the system. It's like a big, you're in quicksand now when you start to get into that. They don't, the Band-Aids that are prescribed aren't Band-Aids that are going to help you get out of the system. They're just going to, help you sustain and maybe ward off a little bit, but you're in the system. You're caught up now and your pathway's determined if you don't change what's going on. And, that's prescribing of statins on everybody, for antidepressants, for not correcting diets. It's set up that way. It's for a reason.
Well, let's stay there for a second because because you weren't here, Josh, last week, so we can pick back up because it's such a big topic. But this we can't really keep saying anymore that we're putting our tinfoil hat on anymore because that's not debatable anymore. Now that they've lowered the standard for testosterone, and I'm just going to kind of sneak this comment for a second or this point, to what Jim was just saying, because he said that we're wearing our tinfoil hat seemingly everywhere now. By them lowering the standard for class 2 or type 2 hypogonadism, that's an admission when we know that men are fatter, depressed, high estrogen, all these other things. They're lowering the standard to seek treatment. That's an absolute open-ended, as Aaron said last week, clear admittance that there's a war on men and that they want men who are less motivated, less masculine, emasculated. Obviously, this needs to be said. We don't talk about this, but when you are low like that, you obviously are less fertile, you're less virile. There's clearly some sort of a eugenics movement against men at this point now. This is not tinfoil hat stuff anymore. This is a clear indication that they have decided that we are not as important in the structure or the hierarchy of human beings. And now they're just basically saying, okay, it's okay to be walking around as a sad sack, 226 testosterone nanograms per deciliter dude and be classified as normal. And we all three know that that's where you're at. You feel pretty shitty.
Now, do you feel that it's a war on men more so than a war on human beings? Because it seems like everything that is pushed out there affects women equally well.
Yeah, I agree, Josh. I was just going to ask that. There's a war on everybody who buys food. This is just the latest bullet that was fired, particularly at men. But yeah, there's obviously, and the system is set up from our whole entire food system, food processing, just the whole, everybody who manufactures food, and pharmaceuticals and medical care. It's all like somebody had planned out, sat down and wrote out a business plan.
It's whatever it is, it's all mass. There's so much crazy shit that's going on right now out there. When you continually see this, it's sad. It's a very poor reflection. Because I think of it as like, what about poor people? The majority of people, as you know, Josh, you talk about this all the time, literally cannot come up with $600, right? Like 80% of people in North America cannot write a check for $600. So, what are they going to do in situations like this where they can't afford quality food? They obviously can't afford, hormone therapy for the most part, or to be optimized. So this is pretty bleak. People got to really go out of their way and really put their thinking cap on to truly try to live an optimized experience at this point.
Yeah, but when you look at it, like, you can't necessarily finger point because, all this stuff is happening, but people choose to be poor in most cases. It's like, Bill Gates said, if you're born poor, it's not your fault. If you choose to stay poor, shame on you.
That's you, right?
Right? So they choose to not go out there and do the research, commit to their health. And so, I mean, I get kind of torn on it, because I do feel bad for those that are in a position that they can't be proactive about it, but also it's because they weren't proactive really their whole entire adult life that they're in that state.
It's like my dad always says, it's one thing to be born poor, but it's another thing to be born poor and stupid. That's a double whammy.
Yeah, it just, I mean, it's the reality of it. And it's like I always teach in my boot camp's more entrepreneur training, but I'm like, look, I mean, it's like the most brilliant time for those that are committed.
Absolutely,
because you have less and less people that are committed, more and more people that accept mediocrity. It's like fishing with dynamite in this life. If you choose to be committed to your business, to your health, to your relationships, taking action is a choice. People need to understand that. So, anybody can go out there and make that choice.
Well, Don Hyde is watching right now, and he just wrote a good comment. I'll just bring it up, and you guys, let's talk about it because it's so true. I mean, this is a little conspiracy. I mean, it's not conspiracy; it's true. But the Georgia Guidestones, right? Like, I know we all know what those are, but like, those things are, and I know about them because my family's in Atlanta, and that's kind of like big stuff down there. And those things just showed up in the 70s, late 70s, and they've been there. And there's like 10 commandments on those things. They're like close to Stone Mountain, Georgia, where these stones are. It's like a right part of Atlanta, like a outside suburb. And that's number one. The population is to remain at 600 million people. And nobody knows who put that stuff there. They all say, oh, it's the Illuminati, it's this, that, and the other. But I mean, like, it seems like, based on what we're talking about right now, that's essentially what is in play right now, is some form of population control, eugenics, something. Because
aren't we a little bit over 600 million?
2 billion just on Facebook.
That's kind of scary, my friend. I think it's 7 billion at last talk. So I guess whatever's coming, there's going to be a lot of people going bye-bye. But no, I don't know, dude. It's very interesting. But we all see this. This is not conspiracy. This is obvious observation. There's definitely a motive to keep people sick, clearly depressed, suboptimal. It's obviously any man or woman can choose to, improve that experience, but there's definitely an overbearing, force or objective or something that's making this the way it is. There's no doubt about it.
It goes back to everything that we've been preaching, man. You have to be proactive about your health. And you have to, I mean, it's easy. Just don't do what everybody else does. Exercise, work out every now and then, eat lean protein and vegetables. I mean, it's, take food with you. It's not that hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Russ just put a comment in here that people vote at least 3 times a day with their
Yeah.
Right. So we all have that power, right? So, so I know in the documentary too, obviously heavily pushes becoming a vegan or the vegetarian lifestyle. How does that fit into play with what you guys preach with optimal health, optimal living?
It's a great question.
I mean, you can absolutely do it. For what I do, I'm still trying to hold on to I would say an above average amount of muscle, over homeostasis and not crazy amount, but above average. And to do that, I need amino acids.
Right.
In today's environment, supplement environment, it's a lot easier than it was. I mean, you can buy pea protein and hemp protein that actually tastes pretty decent. And the amino acid profile is fantastic. It's mixable these days. And so if you do that and you supplement with a thing that you're not getting, depending on if you're a vegan or, just a vegetarian, you supplement the things that you're not getting, probably B vitamins, probably aminos. Yeah, it's absolutely doable. My wife and I were talking about this movie, and I'm like, I can't get people to freaking eat meat and vegetables. You want me to go get them? You want me to eat it? Have them eat a bowl of broccoli and cauliflower for lunch? I mean, that's it's insane. But I get it. If I was diagnosed with a certain type of cancer, I might head that way. but I would supplement with a huge amount of amino acids.
Yeah. So I have a really interesting viewpoint. My good friend Gerald Clark was like us at one time. He was hardcore into training and bodybuilding. He was very muscular. He sent me pictures of what he was like when he was training. Very much living the optimized lifestyle. He's a structural integrator by training. So, he still lives super clean. He's big into yoga. He's like incredibly flexible. He's still ripped, but he's just skinny. He's like 6'1", 180 or 165 pounds. So he's really thin. But, him and I have been back and forth on this. But this is just my viewpoint, and you can Google this. There's a lot of links out there. Not everybody can be a vegan, okay? There's some weird form of it's a neurological disorder that occurs in many people, and Jim knows about this too because he dealt with this at his supplement store. After a certain amount of time of not going with meat, and again, it's like Jim said, it's obviously an amino acid protein derived issue. They start literally losing it. There's something that's happening in their brain chemistry. It's changing. They become very unbalanced. They become unstable. They almost become what you would call like crazy because they're not able to carry on conversation. There's a huge group that's been founded on Google. It's a Google group or one of those, whatever those things are called. There's like 60 or 70,000 people in it. And if I find it when I do a Google search after I talk here, I'll put it in the chat. For people who are recovering vegans. And they all talk about this, that it happens about 7 to 9 years into being a vegan. And they have obviously the medical community has not been able to figure out what it is, but it's believed to be some form of neurological disorder from a lack of amino acids, a specific crucial amino acid, essential amino acid imbalance in the brain. And it leads, like I said, to almost bouts of mania. Like you literally are not in control of your physical and your emotional self. And I keep telling Gerald, he's 5 or 6 years into his veganism and stuff. You got to be really careful. It doesn't affect everybody. There's plenty of people who have been vegans for 20 plus years and they're fine and they have no issues. But there's a lot of people, man. There's some really hardcore people in this Google group because I've read some of their postings of people who were militant vegans like the first 5, 6, 7 years of their life. And then this happened and they said they were very thankful that they met people that said, hey, look, you got to start reintroducing fish. And then once you start reintroducing fish, you can start reintroducing lean grass-fed meat, animal protein, and then all these people came back to normal and they're recovered. So something is going on, and again, I'm not saying this is for everybody, and maybe this has a lot to do with the intermingling of DNA, and the transference over hundreds of thousands of years of human beings, intermingling. But there's definitely an issue. So my guess is, like, if you're going to choose that route, you better be aware of that, be cognizant of that. And then secondarily, and I've read a ton of books on this, Jim knows this, Josh knows this, you can still be spiritual and be high conscious and eat meat, but you're not supposed to. You should thank the meat or bless the meat or say a prayer to the meat before you eat it. There's many, many high spiritual beings, Gandhi, Buddha, a lot of these folks, they all said, in the autobiography of Yogi, Steve Jobs' favorite book, Yoga Hindu or whatever, that guy, he talked about this. He ate meat. He chose to eat meat, but he always thanked the meat, and he gave thanks to it. So, I personally believe that, it's a choice, but you shouldn't be condemned if you choose to eat meat. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, Russ Scala just commented, and we know Russ, friends of all of us, and he studies the brain. He knows the brain, right? Yes. And he says vegans have lower neurotransmitter levels.
I believe that
as a whole. So that could be something to do with what you're talking about there, Jay.
Very, very true. Thanks, Russ.
And I guess without knowing the cause, right? Like you said, haven't been able to medically explain it. You don't know how to supplement to
right
cure that from happening.
Yeah, I wonder. I'm sure somebody's tried to address that. I'm just not well enough versed in it. The people that I saw that were at the end of their wits that would come into my store, I had a lady come in and she had a couple of teeth in a Ziploc baggie and said, my doctor says I need protein and B vitamins. And, we spent a lot of time with this lady and she looked like, kind of it was almost like if you see a plant that hasn't been watered or given sunshine and then you water it and put it outside. I mean, 4 days later, she walks in the store and it looked like she had been watered and put outside and got some sunlight.
That's awesome.
That was the difference in her skin tone and, the brightness in her eyes. But, there's so much information out there and so many people who are doing it. I assume that you can find some intelligent information how to do that and supplement properly, with be it omega-3s, B vitamins, aminos, all that.
Well, Jim, you know what? Your point, too, about like the vegan protein that's out there now is really good and tastes good. So my assumption is that probably that would help too, right? Because back when a lot of these people had the problem, there just wasn't any vegan protein. There wasn't any kind of MRP or instantized.
Well, there was, but it was soy, and the others were terribly tasting, and it was literally like eating chalk. But today's products are much different.
Right.
And there's cricket protein, so you can jump all over that. Yeah.
So then, with this documentary being so popular, so those of you that are jumping on or just jumping on, we're kind of hitting on that, which is the most popular documentary right now on Netflix called What the Health. Were there anything that stood out that you guys saw, though, that you're just like, dude, totally disagree with that? That's totally misleading the general public when they're watching this documentary.
I think it was the hate on eggs.
Yeah.
That I totally disagreed with. Now you can have an egg with, that's been, I guess, the chicken exposed to a massive amount of antibiotics and toxins and so on and so forth, and have an unhealthy egg. But for the most part, if you have a free range organic, you're cutting down, the amount of toxins that theoretically that egg yolk is going to have. But the egg yolk has a massive amount of vitamins, choline, fats, and in that documentary they said, oh yeah, if you eat that much cholesterol, it raises your cholesterol and it's unhealthy, it coats your red blood cells and so on and so forth, and I disagree with that. But if you're eating, I think that's a good choice. But if you're eating, again, a huge amount of polluted animal fat and high insulin at the same time, it's a nightmare. But that stood out to me a lot.
Yeah, I mean, Josh, same thing. I mean, obviously, I did not agree with the fat. Excuse me, he wasn't fat, but he works on fat people. He does the lap band surgery. The gastro. What do they call Jim? Not a gastroenterologist, but who's the kind of guy?
Yeah, the guy who's doing the lap bands.
Yeah, is that a gastroenterologist? Is that who does this?
A general surgeon can do it. I forgot what his exact specialty.
Yeah, I forgot. But you know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah, he was the guy that basically said that high insulin and high blood glucose is not even, it doesn't have anything to do with diabetes. And then he was the guy that talked about the Japanese, and I thought that was nonsense.
In theory, that may be correct, but yeah, he said, it's either going to go to glycogen stores or you're going to burn it off.
Well, but my caveat would be, it could be, you're right, but that's also, you got to put this in context. Again, he's talking about people with high blood fat and high insulin.
Right. And they kind of said that afterwards,
right?
In that little section, but yeah, it was a little misleading. I mean, they definitely had they were coming from their echo chamber and, or from their viewpoint of veganism for sure.
If they would have said that, and they would have admitted that the combination of high fat and high sugar, then I would have been, okay, absolutely. You can make that's causation and correlation, but they were just like, it's not insulin, it's not high blood sugar, it's not, or high carbohydrate consumption that leads to diabetes. And I'm like, So, but you're right. I mean, they did kind of migrate that to the end, but that guy was very outspoken, and maybe they just minced words really bad.
Well, and we know how that is too. When when you're talking to somebody or you take a cut, they chop up what you said. But I think they left a big gap in between the causation of meat and cancer increase. Right. They did say processed, but really that study was on processed meats. And was it the amino acids in the meat, or was it, the pollutants in the meat, or was it the nitrates and all the other shit, the preservatives in the meat? And I think that study broke it down, and it was the preservatives, in combination with the unhealthy fat.
Well, let's just also say big picture at the end of the day, and a lot of people won't say this, and I've been saying this on Twitter for a long time now, and Twitter's my new echo chamber, guys. I'm selling optimized life nutrition on Twitter. But the reality is that all cancer is epigenetic. Okay. They used to believe that, certain people had a, hereditary or innate disposition to, morph into some sort of morphogenic tumor at some point. And we all know now that with pretty strong certainty that lifestyle and environment, which is again all kind of nurture is what's leading to cancer. It's not like you're just going to be born and live a very clean life living in the wilds of Montana and all of a sudden at 55 years old contract cancer. I mean, you're most likely going to live a lifestyle that creates it. And that could be from just shitty food, breathing chemicals, noxious chemicals, living in a smokestack, smoking cigarettes, drinking too much alcohol, whatever it is, but there's some form of, environmental exposure to something that's going to lead to cancer formation.
Well, we all have pre-genetic dispositions of higher rates of cancers.
I believe that. I believe that.
That's true.
I don't think that means that. Because I remember when I was growing up and a kid, I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, and that area, I forget what they call it. There's a name for it. They've done many studies. It's where Procter & Gamble's, the largest basically byproduct, GMO company plant. Their plant is right there. And there was a huge incidence of cancer in that tri-state, Indiana, Ohio, southern Indiana, northern Kentucky, over like 150 years. And there's been many, many studies. And the people that left that area and moved out west or moved south or whatever had, because they studied families over 40 years, had much less incidence of cancer than the people who lived in that area. So again, if you and I were twins, or if you and I lived together since kids and you had a family history of cancer and I didn't, and we were exposed, to roughly the same amount of carcinogens over life, I would have,
the person with the genetic predisposition is going to have it. But if you remove yourself from it, you're going to lower your overall inherited risk, absolutely. But that's one of the other things one of the docs said in there was, if you drink milk or whatever, or if you eat animal proteins, it raises your IGF levels and that causes cancer. And I can tell you from my little community, that does not happen.
Right.
However, if you have a jacked up IGF-1 level, you do, and high insulin, and you have cancer forming or a cancer cell formed, does it increase growth rate? Of course. But it does not cause a cell to go from a nice healthy cell to a cancerous cell.
Right.
And go polymorphic on you. But.
Yeah. So overall, with you guys both watching the documentary, I still have yet to watch it, but would you guys recommend it? Do you feel that it's been it'd be worthwhile for those that watch the show to check out?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with a lot that was said. I like that they exposed, the Diabetes Association, the American Heart Association, the Coleman Foundation, those if you're looking on the American Heart Association for diet advice, you're fucked. You're done. You're in the system. You're going to have, you're going to do the things and follow the recommendations that are going to contribute to vascular inflammation and heart disease. Same with the American Diabetes Association, the diet advice that they have on there, the guy exposed. I mean, it's ridiculous, And so, but it's a good documentary. I think it's worth a watch for sure.
Yeah, I mean, Josh, the only thing I would add to that is everyone should watch that. Everyone in our circle, PSD, TRT Revolution, all the things that we're doing, it's because it just stays in line with what we've been saying. Okay, you've got the diseases of aging are massively accelerating, lifestyles are getting worse, people are getting fatter. So this is a movie that really reinforces all of this. I mean, maybe their argument is, supporting something else along the same lines of causation, but and pushing people into veganism and whatnot. But the reality is that everybody who's aware, I'll kind of say that, consciously aware of what we're seeing and observing in society, this movie is just pushing it, hook, line, and sinker of exactly what we say, which is, as Jim says, meat and vegetables will make your dreams come true. Okay. Optimize your hormones, lower your insulin through metformin and through lower carbohydrate living, and obviously, maximize your training both aerobically and anaerobically through resistance training and cardiovascular exercise. If you do all of those things, you're going to most likely live longer and stronger.
Yeah, love it. So we got one last comment before we jam here. So Sam says, "Hello, killers. So curious to know what oils / fats you'd add to your macros if you're trying to bump your calories. Specifically, thoughts on the recent reports on the saturated fat content on coconut oil. When I read that, I dumped the oil." He put in parentheses, "Not my coffee anymore."
Well, coconut oil as a whole doesn't have really a big nutritional value. Coconut oil as a choice to cook in over other oils like corn oil or some other bullshit omega-6, low temp oil. Yeah, absolutely healthy choice. But to drink coconut oil, if you're not trying to do that just for the MCT content, I don't see a reason.
Jim just supported MCT. Did I just hear that? Is this recording?
Well, you in ketosis? Do you need MCTs? So I wouldn't use it for that. I wouldn't try to make up calories with fat per se if you had to. But I mean, you could do a nut butter. You could do, you can swig olive oil. It depends. I mean, just to make up calories, I don't know how to steer you if you were consuming coconut oil for calories, man. I don't know, but there's other oils to consume that have health benefits like avocado oil, olive oil,
Sam, what's up,
fish
buddy?
oil.
I'm a little different than Jim because obviously I'm doing a lot of intermittent fasting, which I've been experimenting with the metabolic blowtorch diet now for going on 14 days. And I'm going to send you guys the updated one tonight. I'll email it to you because I've been tweaking it and working it. I made a couple of tweaks to it, but man, it really does work. But Sam, if you're trying to gain muscle and you're trying to also not minimize fat deposition, you can use MCT oil like in a protein shake. But as Jim said, they're really pretty much worthless unless you're in a ketosis diet or a ketonic diet or doing like a cyclical ketogenic diet or something like that. From a weight gain standpoint, you just need higher insulin. You're going to need higher carbohydrates. So yeah, I mean, I'm with Jim. There's a lot of different fats. Like I just went to Costco this morning early and got 2 big jugs of almond butter. You can throw that in a Ninja, shaker, a couple tablespoons of that with your protein and get really good blended, healthy fat that also tastes good and is satiating. So. That's your best option. Jim mentioned avocado oil too.
What about if you look at non-oils though, like if you're eating your meat and veggies and you're trying to get that caloric consumption up, just eating natural avocado with it?
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
As long as you're not allergic to avocados, like somebody I know, myself.
The only person on earth.
Yeah,
there's other people. I have met other people that are allergic to them.
Yeah, love it. All right, you guys. Well, that's all the time that we have. So truly appreciate you, those of you that are watching and listening. As always, huge proponents of taking care of yourself, being extremely proactive with this. We are clients of, highly recommend. The place to start is always with your blood work. So we highly recommend you go to www.checkmybloodwork.com. That's really a place to start optimizing your health. So thank you guys so much for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time.